Now, how many of you believe the mark of the beast can be enforced within the next 4 years? If you believe that, then my friends, it's time for us to implement the 5 keys of survival. If it does get enforced, we are prepared. Now, for those who say it's not a possibility the mark of the beast can be enforced in the next 4 years, I want to say to you, you're either God or you're ignorant. I'm very candid and emphatic today. We don't play games here. Why would you say it is an impossibility? Those with those sentiments are actual individuals who are mockers, scoffers, and cynics. As a matter of fact, the Lord has been wanting to return for his people years ago. And before he returns, the mark of the beast must first be enforced. And Christ is waiting with longing desire to return for his people. So there's no more protracted probation. The events in these last days are going to be rapid ones. So for those of you who are saying it's not a possibility, I'm going to submit to you, you need to remove yourself from that willful ignorance. Implement the 5 keys of survival before it's too late. Am I certain the mark of the beast will be enforced in the next 4 years? No, I'm not. What I do know, death can come at any time. Death can come at any time for any one of us. So we need to implement the 5 keys of survival now. And do it now just in case we see the mark of the beast. If not, at least we are ready. Ready at any time. Because when the thief is about to come, the thief does not give you a date and a time. Let me segue. Have you all been seeing the protests going on? The massive hands-off protests going on in several cities here in America? What do all these things mean based on end-time prophecy? Well, today, my special guest, Marie Diaz, will help to bring clarity to these crises as they are fulfilling end-time prophecies. Marie Diaz, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Pastor. It's great to be back.
Let's get right into it. As we can see that Project 2025 ignites massive union protests to usher in Sunday laws. The crisis is here. So where do you want to start?
Well, for those of us that tuned in on this past Friday, this is going to be just another presentation to augment that presentation. If you thought what we discussed on last Friday was something, I mean, this is just going to blow everything out of the water. I'm actually excited to present what we're going to show your audience today.
Let's get right into it.
Sure. So we're going to begin first by taking a look at this article from ABC News so that we can see what just took place on Saturday. It says huge crowds gather in hands-off rallies nationwide in protest of Trump's administration. Tens of thousands of protesters mustered in cities and towns across the country on Saturday to sound off against Trump's administration's cuts to federal government and its policies. We just want to note that there were more than 1,200 rallies nationwide. Several Democratic heavyweights, including some members of Congress, joined the protests and urged the public not to stand for what they called the administration's mismanagement and breaking with constitutional norms. So in other words, people are essentially fed up with all of the things that the current administration is doing. And so they have resorted to a nationwide protest. And so we're going to take a look at a clip so that your audience can have a visual of the number of individuals that were protesting this week. And I do want to note that the protests took place in all 50 states. Let's take a listen.
Now, some of you must have seen or heard of these protests. Clip 1, take a look.
Huge turnouts from Washington, D.C. to Chicago, West Virginia, Utah, and beyond. Protests in nearly every state.
I think America is in terrible distress.
We're showing the current administration that we are not happy and we will not stop.
Demonstrators pushing back on the Trump administration's economic policies. Cuts to the federal workforce.
Rise up!
And Elon Musk's Doge agency.
Demonstrations erupting across the country, from Boston to Charlotte to Texas to California, protesting Trump and billionaire Elon Musk. ABC's Christian Cordero in Washington, D.C.
Hands off are the two words that's bringing everyone out here, and that's serving as a springboard for any of the many issues they care about. Throughout the day today, we have seen signs that say, hands off our schools, hands off our bodies, hands off our Social Security. It seems everyone out here has a message about what they consider government overreach.
Hands off my school, hands off my education, hands off my property. Marie.
Right. And, that's what's peculiar about this protest. It isn't just one issue. It's a conglomerate of many issues. And again, I just want to note that this protest was widespread, was across all 50 states. And, in this following slide, we are going to take a look at a snapshot so that you will be able to see just how many protests there were here in the United States. So if you take a look at that, you're going to see, and also I want to add, I didn't mention this previously, that they're also planning additional protests. I believe the next one is scheduled for April the 12th. And so when you take a look at this map, and when you take a look at their website, you can see that this is something that is massive. Now, as I mentioned, yes,
let's
sir.
emphasize that some more, because here we have hands off, hands off, hands off. Friends, take a look at this actual chart. This is their website. You can see on the left, the president, on the right, Elon Musk. Hands off, that's the website there. And again, as we just heard, it was a massive protest in all 50 states. Look at those dots as far northwest as Washington, Seattle, all the way to Maine, all the way down to Florida, Texas, California, all over the map, all those dots. Marie, take it away so people can understand the gravity of this, how widespread this is, that this is a movement we need to pay attention to. Now, did any one of us, Marie, did you receive an email inviting you to the rally?
I did not.
So in other words, the point I'm making here is they have a platform. And people are connected to this platform, right? And it's a possibility somebody did receive an email or a text message, join us for the Hands Off rally. A movement is on foot, but God's people are in bed under their covers, snoring and sleeping. Marie, take it away.
Right. And just as we're seeing how large and extensive this protest was here in the United States, it wasn't only here in the States, which is very interesting. I wasn't able to show this here, but there were some protests that took place in Canada. But in the following article, it's going to show that there are also protests in solidarity with Americans in Europe. So let's take a look at this next headline. It says, major anti-Trump hands-off protests erupt across Europe. Hundreds of people in European cities, including Frankfurt, Berlin, London, Lisbon, and Paris, took to the streets in solidarity with American protests, highlighting the global impacts of Trump's policies. Now, that's interesting. I think that we ought to take note to this, that the fact that the reason why they're protesting here in the United States as well as in other countries is because of the policies that President Trump has just recently implemented. And just remember that the tariffs have gone worldwide. So, we have to look at this on the grand scheme to see that what is being done, and the fact that people are upset with what has taken place is because of what President Trump is currently doing.
Now, I want to focus on the tariffs later on, but let's hold that until you proceed. Marie.
Sure. So now, before we head into the breaking news, with what you have put on the cover of this video, I think it's important for us to lay a foundation so that we can understand where we're going and how all of these things are interlinked. So let's take a look at this next headline that's coming from The Guardian. It says, Trump vowed to champion U.S. workers. The reality has been a relentless assault. So based on this headline, during President Trump's campaign, they made the attempt to style themselves as Trump, being a friend to the U.S. worker. However, workers and some of the unions have felt otherwise. In fact, what's interesting is that even prior to his election, he was having a conversation with Elon Musk, and he made some pretty controversial remarks. And so we're going to take a look at this headline. It says, Trump and Musk discuss firing striking workers. The UAW is now seeking an NLRB investigation. And we're going to take a listen to the clip so that you can hear it for yourself from the horse's mouth what they had to say about the striking workers.
And this is where Trump referred to Elon as the great cutter.
Yes.
Meaning you're cut from your job. If you want to protest on the streets against our policies, go home, you're fired, you're gone. Elon Musk, the great cutter. Watch this. Listen attentively.
Former President Trump and Elon Musk wrapped up their 2-hour conversation on X. The United Auto Workers Union, which endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris, announced it's filing federal labor charges against both men for advocating in that conversation for the illegal firing of striking workers, they say. Here's what the union is referring to.
Well, you're the greatest cutter. I mean, I look at what you do. You walk in and you just say, you want to quit? They go on strike. I won't mention the name of the company, but they go on strike and you say, that's okay. You're all gone. You're all gone. So every one of you is gone.
That's striking.
It is.
If you strike, you're gone. Elon Musk, the greatest cutter. Marie.
So can you imagine as a union worker hearing this from the president, right? Well, he at that particular time, he wasn't the president, but now is the president, right? And we're going to see some of the changes that he is making during his administration is directly affecting the workers. And so obviously this didn't sit very well with the union workers. And just the idea that a union worker, who is exercising their right to be able to protest, to strike, right? And they're being told by, I just want to note, Elon Musk is a billionaire, that we're just going to cut you from your job. Obviously, like I said, didn't sit very well with the workers. And so now we're going to take this a step further and we're going to see what President Trump has done more recently that is angering the labor union. So let's take a look at this next article here. It says, Trump puts America first with federal collective bargaining ban. President Donald Trump just ended collective bargaining in much of the federal government. The president's order signed Thursday prohibits collective bargaining with the labor unions at well over a dozen federal departments and agencies. Recent estimates indicate that at least 1 million federal workers at these agencies are unionized, and those covered by the executive order are no longer required to collectively bargain with the unions. Now, for those of us that are unfamiliar with the concept of collective bargaining, yes. Collective bargaining is when a group of workers negotiate with their employer on things such as pay, working hours, benefits, and working conditions. With a ban in place, it means that the workers are not allowed to negotiate the law as a group. They have to go individually.
And so, phrase, Marie, the key phrase is the federal employees banding together
yes.
to negotiate with the federal agency through the union.
Yes.
So
yes.
they come together and appeal to the union boss, and the union boss appeals on their behalf to
yes.
the federal government.
Correct.
So now
Correct.
he bans that.
Yes.
Bans that. So now the workers have no voice.
Exactly.
To negotiate requirements, conditions, wages, hours, etc.
Right. And so it obviously sets the stage for an individual to be taken advantage of, especially if you're talking about individuals who aren't very outspoken, who can advocate for themselves. And this is the idea behind establishing a union, is that the union representative will work on behalf of the employees. So now we're going to take a listen to a clip. And in this video clip, you're going to sense or get a sense of the gravity of this decision that President Trump has taken. So let's take a listen to that.
President Trump signed an executive order last night aimed at ending collective bargaining rights for many government workers. The order applies to workers across many federal agencies, including the Departments of State, Defense, Justice, and Health and Human Services. Earlier today, I spoke to the president of the United Automobile Workers, Shawn Fain, about President Trump's efforts. Since you brought up this executive order, it regards an effort by the Trump administration through the president to stop or certainly dramatically slow collective bargaining for federal workers. Randy Irvin, who's currently the president of the National Federation of the Federal Employees, calls it the biggest assault on collective bargaining he has ever seen. Do you agree with those sentiments?
Yeah. Let's hear what he says in clip number 2.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, spot on. Look, I remember when I was 12 years old when Reagan busted the PATCO workers. You know, that was a massive issue back then, and we've heard a lot of people talk about the labor. Yes, and you know that labor should have done more then. Look, this is 100 times worse than PATCO ever dreamed of being. When you're talking, 700,000 people, their contracts just being taken away, and so, as I said, free speech is under attack. Unions are under attack. You look at the changes to the NLRB. You look at the situation with the Department of Labor, Department of Education, Veterans Affairs. I mean, why are all these things under attack? Medicare, Social Security. It's because, billionaires want more tax cuts for themselves. And it's been proven time and again, that's not what works for America. That's not good for the American people. The working class people in America, they want their fair share.
So here we see a crisis being ensued to financially oppress the working class, and they're now rising up. Marie.
Right. And I just want to reiterate some of the points that he mentioned. He said that another union representative said that this is the biggest assault on collective bargaining that he has ever seen. And Shawn Fain, the individual that you just said, responds by saying that it is 100 times worse than what happened in the past. And so, like I said, we're just reiterating these things so that your audience can get a sense of not just what's happening, but how the unions are feeling in response to this. And he also, talked about the fact that, he lists a variety of things, but he's talking about how all of the things that are currently taking place are not in the interests of the common worker. And so, again, we're just laying the stage so that you can understand, the anxiety, the fear, and just, the anger that the union representatives are feeling at this time.
And as you mentioned, fear and anxiety, many of us can recall when the UAW was about to go on strike.
Yes.
How that would have negatively impacted travel and transport in all throughout the U.S. The railroads, all of it, vehicles, the plants that manufacture cars and trucks, everything was about to be shut down. And yet we had a reprieve. What if that were to happen now? What would happen in America? Come to a grinding halt? The economy? We don't realize how close we are to the end. From a financial perspective, we need to wake up. Marie.
Correct. And I also think about when the longshoremen, were threatening to strike as well. And, just the fact that they said they could essentially grind the economy to a halt, and even just one day of striking has such a profound impact on the economy. So they definitely wield a lot of power. So we're going to take a listen to another clip. And this clip is just going to show you what the union's response has been to what President Trump just recently did. So let's take a listen to that.
We begin today's show with President Trump's push to end collective bargaining rights for federal workers that have helped to lead the resistance to cuts by billionaire Elon Musk's so-called Department of Government Efficiency, by signing up thousands of new members joining protests and by filing many lawsuits. Unions have called Trump's order the biggest attack on the labor movement in U.S. history.
As you know, this executive order uses national security for the actions. However, we know this is just pretext, not justification, because there's no way that you've had employees such as nurses and doctors and scientists, in a collective bargaining agreement for decades. And all of a sudden now they are not able to be in an agreement. That's strictly pretextual and has nothing to do with national security.
Before I go to clip number 2 here, just take note of what he said. This is the biggest assault upon workers here in America. Clip 2.
I was just going to say this is nothing but retaliation against our union for standing up for its members. But this is our job. This is what we should do, is stand up for our members, because, it's been proven that what this administration is trying to do to federal employees is illegal, and we will continue to fight for the membership. We will continue to fight for America, and we will continue to fight for democracy. That's our job. And we are outraged by this.
Marie.
He's clearly outraged. And, and I guess in his view, rightly so, right? He clearly feels as if this executive order is in retaliation against the unions, especially since President Trump signed this order under the pretext that the unions are a national security threat, right? And when these rules, especially in view of the fact that these rules have been in place for years, decades. And but here is where we're going to get kind of into the meat of this presentation. In the following article, we are going to see who is at the helm of this movement and who's really driving these policies. So let's take a look at this headline. It says AFL-CIO President on Federal Collective Bargaining Executive Order, very definition of union busting. The AFL-CIO President, Liz Shuler, issued the following statement on a new executive order from the Trump administration stripping collective bargaining and union rights from workers across the federal government, straight out of Project 2025. This executive order is the very definition of union busting. It strips the fundamental right to unionize and collectively bargain from workers across the federal government at more than 30 agencies. And so workers will no longer have a voice on the job or the ability to organize with their coworkers for better working conditions at work so they can effectively provide the services the public relies on. And so they are pointing the finger at Project 2025 as the mechanism, the organization, behind this push to strip the unions of their ability to be able to collectively bargain. Saying that this is their policy. So again, we have another video which is going to confirm this point. If we can play that as well.
So it seems as if that proverb, all roads lead to Rome, right. All roads lead to Project 2025?
Yes. And
is that what we're seeing and hearing, Marie?
Yes, sir.
Here's a clip.
Quote, Congress should pass legislation allowing waivers from federal labor laws like the NLRA and FLSA under certain conditions, end quote. Sounds pretty benign, like the NLRA and the FLSA. Why doesn't the book spell out the laws? Because this thing is decidedly not an exercise in brevity. It's 922 pages. The reason they don't spell it out is because the NLRA, or the National Labor Relations Act of 1935, guarantees a worker's right to unionize their workplace. The FLSA is the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, which guarantees overtime pay.
Don't forget the overtime pay.
Yes.
Let's finish up this clip with clip 2.
Project 2025 wants states to be able to ignore these basic and long-held guarantees. Forget about undoing Roe or even the civil rights movement before that. The architects of this document want to take us back even further. They basically want to undo the New Deal, but they don't want you to be able to tell that that's what they're doing, so they're hiding the ball in the hope that you won't read it at all. But even if you do read it, like my team has, you won't realize that Project 2025 wants to eliminate basic workers' rights that lifted America out of child labor and the sweatshop era. And as we covered last week, this book also plans to create taxes, raise taxes for millions of Americans. So when you pair that with the anti-worker policy that plans that are in this particular chapter, Chapter 18, What you have is an all-out assault on the working class.
Marie.
Yes. And so did you catch that last point there? I just want to reiterate. He said with the changes they made to the unions, in addition to the recent tariffs, it is an all-out assault on the working class. So this clearly, in their interpretation, is against the unions, against the regular working blue-collar worker, right? And so, but the real question is, we should be asking ourselves why. Why are they making such significant changes to the labor laws that specifically affect the union workers? And why now? That's a question I think that we should discuss, and we'll get into that a little bit further. Right. So now in the following headlines, we're going to confirm these points again, but I want your audience to pay particular attention to the fact that they mentioned the Fair Labor Standards Act, right? That is key because that is going to come up a little bit later in our presentation. But let's take a look at this headline here. It says, Project 2025's extreme anti-labor agenda is an attack on unions and the entire working class. The initiative's policy book, Mandate for Leadership, is an attempt to roll back New Deal era working class victories by allowing state level exemptions from the National Labor Relations Act and the Fair Labor Standards Act, and by creating non-union employee involvement organizations to undermine unions' negotiating power. So we're going to take a listen to another clip where various lawmakers and union representatives are going to affirm that Project 2025 is the one that's pulling the strings behind the scenes. So let's take a listen to that.
Here it is.
It gets rid of overtime. It gets rid of all sorts of protections for organizing and the rights of association.
That 900-page document should scare the hell out of anybody who works for a living.
Telling the average American worker and family, you're on your own.
That is who he is and Project 2025 are catering to, not the American people.
You're the greatest cutter. I mean, I look at what you do. You walk in and you just say, you want to quit? They go on strike. I won't mention the name of the company, but they go on strike and you say, that's okay, you're all gone.
Let's stay right there on clip 2.
You're all gone.
When unions were at their peak in the 50s and the 60s, we had a growing middle class.
Project 2025 is a union-busting plan.
What we do is we help people have a better, bigger piece of the economic pie.
Trump's Project 2025 would allow for him to put and install lackeys and loyalists at the NLRB, which would, of course, make it harder to unionize and easier to decertify unions.
It is a plan to help corporations, and it is a plan to restrict the rights and the freedoms of average Americans.
Marie.
So I hope that we're getting a sense of how incensed, these union representatives, even lawmakers, are because of what is currently taking place. But we're going to continue going forward. What I really want you to see now is that in the following article, it gives us a better idea, in addition to the head of Project 2025, who else has their hand in the proverbial pot. And so let's take a look at this article again. It says Project 2025 is organized by the Heritage Foundation and includes more than 100 conservative groups on its advisory board, which have collectively received more than $55 million from groups tied to conservative mega donor Leonard Leo and Charles Koch. It says Leo has been pushing the Supreme Court to further erode the power of organized labor, and the Koch family has waged a war on unions for more than 60 years. And of course, most of us that have been a part of this ministry, we are very familiar with who Leonard Leo is and his affiliation with the Catholic Church.
Let's continue.
Yes. And so again, this article continues to show now who else is behind, who specifically is behind this movement. So it mentions Jonathan Berry, and it also notes that he is the author of the labor chapter in the Mandate for Leadership. And listen to what he has to say. It says, in practice, Modern unions in the American private sector are beset by serious agency problems that limits their effectiveness as institutions for individual workers to share in the common good. Again, for those of us who have a thorough understanding of the common good, we know that Sunday laws are entrenched in the common good. And even if you weren't aware of that, we're going to prove later on that is their objective, is to legislate Sunday laws.
Because common good, from the Roman Catholic standpoint, also includes Sunday worship by law. Now, this article, quoting directly Jonathan Berry, is Exhibit A if we were in court. This is the nail in a sure place, because some of the video clips we showed from the montage were from the secular press. And I know, Marie, the scoffers are going to say, but you're quoting from MSNBC. You're playing clips from CNN. What do you expect them to say of the Elephant Party? This is a direct quote here from Jonathan Berry, actually stating that they are against the present structuring of the unions. And that's why they must come in and make changes. Now, some changes are going to be good. Of course. But remember, what is the end goal? The end goal is Sunday worship by law. Satan always connects with error and deception. Enough good to make it plausible. Enough good to be consumed and accepted without knowing danger is in the pot. Here it is. Unions need to mount a militant response. Marie.
Mercy, right? That is unbelievable. And so again, you're going to see with what intensity and the language, the rhetoric that they're using, when it comes to defeating what President Trump is planning. It says unions need to mount a militant response to Trump's assault. Too many unions have responded to Donald Trump's historic attack on federal workers with little more than words. To beat back anti-union assault, organized labor needs to break with decades of timidity. Let's continue with the next article, which we had referred to earlier. It says, to every single American who cares about the fundamental freedom of all workers, now is the time to be even louder. The labor movement is not about to let Trump, an unelected billionaire, destroy what we fought for generations to build. We will fight this outrageous attack on our members with every fiber of our collective being. Mercy. Are you hearing this? And I just want us to pause for a minute here, because this current administration has ticked so many prophetic boxes, and I think that we should kind of name some of these things, and perhaps your audience can help us as well. This administration is currently openly advocating for the union of church and state, right? He has opened a White House faith office. He is also following the Project 2025's blueprint, so much so that they have already established over 40% or implemented, I should say, over 40% of their policies. And mind you, this is the same Mandate for Leadership book that also talks about legislating a Sunday law. And now he's stirring up the labor unions. We have to know. I don't know if I forgot to mention anything else. Of course, Pastor, you just recently talked about the fact that there are many news media outlets who have referred to him as a new Constantine, right? And we're also not to forget to mention the fact that he is establishing a platform for stable coins, and which in turn is a digital dollar. I could go on and on. I don't know. Did I miss anything else? He's doing so many things.
The signs are ominous. They're clear for those who want to see them. And again, people are going to debate, well, since I support the donkey party, let me debate the right, who are for the elephant party. And these individuals who are in parties will begin to have strife among themselves. We are not here on this platform to support either donkey party or elephant party. We are not for unions, nor are we against unions. What we're showing people is the end goal. What is the trajectory of this movement? The end result is Sunday worship by law. That's what we must focus on. Marie, carry on.
Yes. Thank you for mentioning that, because often we hear people say, or there's comments, as if we're pro one party or the other. We're simply highlighting the prophetic implications. So I thank you for pointing that out. So now we're going to backtrack and we're going to go back to what we were originally discussing when we began this presentation so that you can see how this relates to the protest. So let's take a look at this following headline. It says, event alert. Join us in saying hands off our unions. On April 5th, workers are joining with our allies and community members across the country to tell President Trump and Elon Musk, hands off our unions. On Friday, the Trump administration took its most blatantly anti-worker, anti-union action yet, an executive order stripping the right to organize with hundreds of thousands of federal workers. This is union busting, plain and simple, and we won't stand for it. This Saturday, America's unions are coming together with allies of labor at hundreds of events all across the country to send a message. And of course, they say hands off our unions and contracts. So brothers and sisters, the signs literally are screaming at us. And of course, for those of us who know what the spirit of prophecy tells us about labor unions, we have to know that this is somehow intimately related. The article continues. It says, it's clear that their executive order is punishment for unions that are leading the fight against the administration's illegal actions in court and in the streets in a blatant attempt to silence us. So, Pastor, this could very well be the movement, as I mentioned, that was prophesied, that is going to bring to view that labor crisis that's going to lead into that mark of the beast crisis.
So whatever policy the Trump administration with Kevin Roberts, Jonathan Berry, and Leonard Leo want to push on the American people, they have to first weaken the resistance. That's what they're doing, weakening the resistance. Let's take that playbook and apply it for the last days. When they enforce their tyrannical laws, even Sunday worship by law, would there be a protest from God's people as we begin to present the everlasting gospel, even given the loud cry? Yes. So what must they now do? Weaken the resistance. Put laws in place wherein we cannot protest. We cannot be successful in this resistance against tyrannical policies. Now, again, in the last days, it won't only be the right. It's left and right uniting to come against God's people. You think about this. If they now can repudiate your federal freedom, let's put federal aside. If they can repudiate the right for the people to assemble and to redress government policies which are inimical to their rights, you cannot assemble, and if you do protest, you're gone, you're fired. What's going to happen in the last days? We can't assemble either. We cannot protest either against the policies from church and state when the mark of the beast is enforced. So the signs are here, very clear for those who want to see it. And that's why we're told in Inspiration that every principle of our Constitution will be repudiated. Hands off. Now look at the spin off from this. Hands off my property, they're saying in the protest. Hands off my Medicare and Social Security. Hands off my job and employment. Very, very soon, we need to say, hands off my Sabbath. Hands off God's Sabbath. Hands off God's Sabbath. And that's where we're heading, because they are going to make sure they enslave the population. Marie.
And Pastor, isn't it interesting that Project 2025 has their hands both with Sunday legislation and also with the trade unions, which are two elements that we have been told in the spirit of prophecy will bring about the Sunday law. So I just find that very interesting.
Hold on. It was also historic that during the Trump campaign for re-election, it was a shocker to everybody when he invited or allowed a pro-union director to speak at the convention. Everyone was like, what does this mean? Now we're seeing it. Marie.
Right. Makes sense. Correct. Yes. So now we're going to take a look at another clip. And in this clip, it's a montage of clips that were taken from the recent protests. And you're going to see just how massive the protest is and how they are firing up the union. So let's take a listen to that.
In the labor movement, we live by the motto that an injury to one is an injury to all. When one worker is attacked, every worker is attacked. When one union is attacked, every union is attacked.
Well, I'm up here today next to workers who are the human face of what is going on. The people who make our lives better, who serve our communities, and whose lives have been turned upside down by this administration.
We will not be silenced. We will not bow down. We'll stand up and say, hands off our union.
Hands off my Sabbath. That's coming next. Marie.
Chills, right? I mean, this would be different if it were localized, if it were on a small scale, but this was nationwide and it's also spreading to other countries. I mean, when I was looking into this research, it's eerily reminiscent of Occupy Wall Street. Do you remember that?
Yes.
A few years ago?
Yes.
And so again, remember that was about, the common worker. And of course, this leads my mind to, the book Education, page 228, paragraph 2, and so again, we're just seeing that. I want to reiterate this point that the protest that is currently taking place involves a lot of interests that have to do with the regular everyday American, and they're all coming together. We're talking about union rights. We're talking about abortion, immigration rights, the tariffs, the inflation that people are already feeling, the dismantling of the government, LGBTQ rights. I mean, the list goes on and on. I mean, you could just make up a reason just because you may not like this current administration. People will jump into this just to protest. And remember, there's a spirit that's involved with rioting and protesting, and you can see how it's enveloping and how it's developing into something that could, like I said, potentially lead to the final crisis.
Now, let's emphasize that point. Occupy Wall Street, several years ago, dissipated, and now we're seeing a repetition. Let's take a look at the natural to make known the spiritual and the prophetic. Think about waves. Water, waves in the ocean. At some point, the waves come and it recedes, moves towards shore, flows right back. But sometimes there are crises that lead to, in nature, that leads to the waters, the waves going beyond their boundaries, beyond the shoreline, destroying property, destroying businesses, homes, and lives. It happens. So one day, very, very soon, these riots and protests that flow in and flow out, dissipate, it comes back. One of these days, one of these protests will lead right into the mark of the beast crisis. How do we know which one? How do we know which one? So it behooves us, by God's grace, to implement those 5 keys of survival now so we are not caught off guard. Marie.
And, also with that same analogy, Pastor, we also have to know that with waves too, you can discern the difference too with how far the wave is going back and how big it is. Occupy Wall Street was, here in America. This, like I said, and I'm going to continue to reiterate this movement has gone beyond the United States into other countries. Remember, the tariffs are affecting all nations. Our economic systems, our economies are interlinked. And so when one goes down, they all go down. And so if we're struggling here, other nations are struggling as well. And so what may potentially start here can again spread into other countries.
And just to give the biblical scripture, it's not accidental. Luke 21, signs in the sun, moon, and stars, verse 25. Men's hearts But before that, it says, distress of nations with perplexity. Here it is now. The seas and the waves are roaring. Men's hearts failing them for fear. Signs of the last days. Then you will see the second coming of Christ. Luke 21, verse 25 through verse 27. Why sea and waves roaring points to people. Chapter 17, verse 15 of Revelation. The sea and waves are also literal. Sun, moon, and stars, literal. Signs of the last days. And the seas and the waves are roaring. The people are crying out. Signs of the last days.
You know, and yes, we're going to transition here. And we're going to see that this is a classic problem, reaction, solution situation. Now, we're going to revert back to one of the previous articles that we had mentioned earlier from Media Matters. And now it mentions, again, Jonathan Berry and the fact that he authored the labor portion in Project 2025's mandate for leadership. So let's just show this again so that we can see the point that I'm saying here. It says Jonathan Berry authored the labor chapter in mandate, and of course that's for leadership. Now, Pastor, this was what was so interesting, right? Who was just nominated to become the solicitor of labor? In other words, the lead attorney for the Department of Labor. I mean, who's
Jonathan
writing
Berry.
this? Correct. So, Pastor, who is writing this script?
Exactly.
You know, right. And so you mean to tell me that the organization whose policies have effectively stripped the union workers of their rights is now going to give legal advice to the Secretary of Labor? It doesn't make sense. You know, I was trying to think of an example to make it a little more concrete so that we could understand the gravity of what was just done. Imagine if a civil leader rose to power. And now you have your First Amendment rights, right? So say this civil leader rises to power and they strip you of your First Amendment rights. And then they tell you that they're going to give you back certain rights based on their particular agenda. Like, does that make sense?
No.
This is literally what they're doing. I mean, it's absolutely brilliant. I mean, it's a masterpiece. And I could see, if you really look at the grand scheme of things, you can see how this will work, you know, to further their agenda.
And this is Jonathan Berry, who's now the chief legal expert in that department and the actual secretary of DOL, Department of Labor, is pro-union.
Yes, yes.
Pro-union, but they're blaming the Trump administration for stripping the rights of unions and its members. You're like, what's going on here? It appears to be convoluted, but they know exactly what they're doing. And here it is. This is another analogy. I believe that they are stirring up the hornet's nest, stirring up the ant's nest. If they can appear by law and mandates to oppress the union and its members, what do you think the members are going to do? Rise up and make demands. And whatever the demands are going to be, Jonathan Berry is ready to say, okay, we will sign off on this because it's the same agenda, but we want the people to demand it.
Right. And Pastor, isn't that what the Sunday Law movement is about? It's a grassroots movement. And so it's not just one issue, it's several issues. And the same solution can address all issues.
Before you go there,
it's genius.
Before you segue, let's talk about these tariffs, because I want people to understand this. In the changing of the FLSA laws and the National Labor NRL
Relations Act. Mm-hmm.
Right. The changing of these policies, one of them is going to be not only time and a half, because we want people not to work on Sundays. That's what Jonathan Berry is pushing. That is what Project 2025 is pushing. No work on Sundays. One way they'll get that done, imagine them saying to the companies, if you want workers to work on Sunday, I want you all to pay time and a half. Well, that's already there. I mean, if you come in beyond your 40 hours on weekends is time and a half. What if they say time and a half, we are going to increase that? So for example, if a worker works 1 hour and it's $10 per hour, comes in on Sunday, it's now 10 plus 5, $15 per hour on Sunday. What if they make that number much higher? So much so that the companies, the bosses can't afford it. What's going to happen? No work on Sundays.
Correct.
What if they say, for example, worker works $10 per hour. If you want your workers to come in on Sunday, it's $10 plus 20. So now it's $30 an hour. By the way, it's 10 plus 30, $40 an hour. What's going to happen now? The companies won't be able to afford that over time. And now they get their Sunday rest, Sunday worship by law, just through money. And if you say, well, that will never take place, watch this now. What has Trump done with tariffs? This man slapped at least 10% tariffs on all countries. All. Some countries is 30%. Some is 50%. Jamaica just received 10%. A country in the Caribbean, I forgot the name of it, it's 38%. Other first world countries, 50%. What's going to happen? They can import goods as they used to. Now, on one side, many are going to say, well, in defense of Trump administration, now we can buy local. We can manufacture local. It's going to build up the local economy. That's true. But what is the end goal? What is the deception in that? What is it? Now they are going to, now it's easier now to control the economy locally. You have to go along with their policies. And it's much easier for the mark of the beast to be enforced because they control the economy. Marie.
You know, Pastor, I was thinking about another quote from the Spirit of Prophecy, you know, on that point where you're talking about how they are going to manipulate, right? And to force people to not keep their businesses open on Sunday, right? Because they're going to, isn't there a quotation where she talks about fines and inducements, you know, to keep some? So it's clearly related to this Sabbath crisis. You can see the handprint all over this movement. It's unbelievable.
That's page 607.
Mm-hmm.
Page 607 in the book Great Controversy. They will be threatened with fines, imprisonment, and some will be offered positions of influence and other rewards and advantages as inducements, that's your word, as inducements to renounce their faith.
Mm.
It's
and
coming.
You know,
yes.
It is. In one of the clips that we're going to play, Jonathan Berry actually uses the word induce. It's like God is telling us this is the movement. I believe it's that first clip where he's at Moments of Truth. I'm sure we're going to get to that as well. So again, over and over, you know, Project 2025 is proving to be very much in line with prophetic events.
I wonder if they say to professed Sabbath-keeping people, if you work on Saturday, not if you work on Sunday now, your boss must pay you whatever per hour times 3 per hour. $10 per hour. Now you're getting 40 per hour if you work on Sunday. Boss men say no work on Sunday. Now they say, well, if you work on Saturday, it's 10 plus 3. I wonder how many Sabbath keepers are going to be like Judas Iscariot.
Help us.
Finish it. Selling out God, his truth, his Sabbath, just to get a higher paycheck. That day's upon us. Marie, take it away.
Well, we're going to confirm the points that we just discussed. And in this following article, it proves that Jonathan Berry was just nominated as the solicitor of labor. And just so that you have an idea of what this position entails, it says President Trump nominated Jonathan Berry as a solicitor of labor at the Department of Labor. If confirmed, Berry will be the chief legal officer at the Department of Labor and have the independent authority to initiate lawsuits to enforce more than 180 federal laws, including that law we just discussed, the Fair Labor Standards Act. And of course, it goes on to mention that he was the author of the Project 2025 Mandates for Leadership portion in their book. And so, here is where we're going to transition so that your audience can have a better understanding as to why it was necessary for them to do what they did, why it was necessary for them to ban collective bargaining, and why they're also stirring up, in particular, the unions here at this point. So let's take a listen to this first clip of Jonathan Berry. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe this is the clip where he talks about inducements. If it's not this one, it'll be the next one of this clip.
Here it is.
One of the interesting proposals that you've laid out in Project 2025 handbook from Heritage is stuff around the Sabbath. Mm-hmm. What are some of the ideas that you have there?
Yes. So this is, it sounds controversial. Mm-hmm. In many respects, it is a return to something that basically always everyone ever had. Mm-hmm. And it's specifically the idea of encouraging Sabbath rest through discouraging commerce on the Sabbath. The proposal that's in our book is amending the basic federal overtime law, Fair Labor Standards Act, to require that overtime be paid for all work done on the Sabbath.
And Marie, that's the point there. Now, when they do this, for it to work, they have to make sure that number is so high, the companies cannot afford it.
Correct.
It's not just time and a half. Time and a half. That's what's going on right now. Time and a half. If you work overtime. If you come in on Christmas, time and a half. You come in on, I don't know, some other holiday, time and a half. More than that now. So they can force the hand to get Sunday worship by law. Marie, here it is, clip 2. Is this one you want?
I do. But I just want to mention also in this point that he mentioned that they're amending the Fair Labor Standards Act so that they can encourage rest, right? And so this is why I was saying earlier that they had to strip away those rights so that they can build it back up from the ground again with provisions in there for legislating or resting on Sunday. So,
go on Marie again, please. Marie, hold on, because this is important, but go ahead quickly.
Right. And so as we're looking at this, we have to understand that all of this ties in hand with what we're seeing taking place with the unions. And so this is why it's so intriguing to see, as I mentioned earlier, how Project 2025 is so far thinking. It reminds me of what we've been told about Rome and how she thinks in decades, well in advance of us. And this is why we have to be very vigilant, when we're looking and thinking and even doing our research so that we're able to connect the dots here.
Home from the office. Yes.
So now we're going to go back to this discussion about the unions, because I want to be able to tie this link back to the unions. And so in this clip here, he is going to tell you what he is going to do on day one. And he's going to be speaking.
Marie,
yes, sir.
That's not where I want to go right now. We need to interject something. Something needs to be inserted. Everybody who is listening and watching, just lay aside what you're doing right now and give me 10 seconds. Jonathan Berry just stated that he's going to alter, change whatever norms is there, the policy, FLSA, in order to induce Sunday rest by law, Sunday worship by law. What comes to your mind? Change the law of the land for workers to get Sunday worship by law. What scripture comes to your mind? Back to Marie, preacher.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking of Exodus, right? I'm thinking of what took place there, right? Because at one time they were allowed to rest, right? And then Pharaoh ended up legislating that they had to work when they were supposed to rest.
May I add one more
Certainly.
to augment that point? We can go back to Daniel 7:25. They will think to change God's times and laws. And that's where you have Sunday worship by law by the beast power. Daniel 7:25. So what will the image of the beast do? Protestant America in the US, changing laws to bring about Sunday worship by law. That had to be inserted. Marie, carry on.
Yes. Wow. A nail in a short place, Pastor. So now here, like I said, in this following clip, we're going to see how they're going to tie this back to the unions. And this is why it's all related. So let's take a listen to this clip here.
One of the
home from the office.
Yes.
And we were home, so how do you, so you pitch the idea of maybe sort of, having more sort of, rules around keeping the Sabbath holy, right? So what are the, I guess the big picture, how do we sell America on this vision of labor is good, and sacred, and
yes,
and also then what do you on day one take into the new Secretary of Labor?
Something I really encourage. I don't see a big. It's harder to see a big federal role for this. I think this is more a question of state and local law. Is reinvigorating where possible Sabbath rest laws. To be very specific, like it used to be, this was basically the norm through, as best I've looked into this some, I'm working on some research on this, literally dating back to Constantine and his recognition of Christianity in the Roman Empire, that you've had a pretty consistent tradition in Western civilization of taking Sunday off from commerce and having a time not only for, it's not merely from rest in the sense of abstinence from work, but it's rest for time with God, time worshiping God. It's rest for time with community, and even before, in between, is time with family.
Marie.
So he, again, is telling you that on day one, he is going to work with the Secretary of Labor to begin legislating Sunday laws, right? And so we're talking about the Labor Secretary, the person who manages the labor relations for the government. By the way, this video, again, was recorded on November the 20th of 2024. That's 16 days after President Trump was elected into office, right? And it was before he was confirmed, because he was just confirmed, he hasn't been confirmed. He was nominated on April the 1st. This was before President Trump banned collective bargaining. And this was also before any protests broke out. I mean, are we seeing how all of this is coming together? And so, like I said, the plan has been laid into light.
Let me chime in. These are the signs, I believe, that God allows us to see to strengthen our faith in the words of the Bible and the spirit of prophecy. Marie, this man did not say what he said in his house, on his bed with his wife, and someone tapped his cell phone, put a bug in his room in his house. This is a public forum. This man just told the whole world, we are changing the laws to bring about Sunday worship by law. Would you not think Profess SDA would see this as a sign, an ominous sign, the predicted, prophesied harbinger is just on the horizon? It's coming.
You would think.
The man just said it. We are changing the laws to bring about Sunday worship by law. And that's why I'm saying again, it appears the next 4 years, we may very well see the mark of the beast enforced. If not, we would have taken 4 years closer. We don't know. Get ready right now. And that's why evangelize, evangelize. It's time for aggressive, effective evangelism. The signs are here, and he was just nominated. How did he know he would be nominated? And Marie, it's a possibility. I would even go out on a limb. It's a high possibility he's going to be confirmed.
I believe he will.
Day one, this is the agenda. Day one. Now, he said, we want to reinvigorate. As an attorney, these men don't use wasted words. They use choice words. When I say to reinvigorate something, it means it lacked vigor, energy. Reinvigorate could mean revival. Reinvigorate could mean to restore. And in the context of reinvigorating Sabbath laws, to implement Sunday worship by law, that would be the healing of a deadly wound. The revival, reinvigorating the revival of popery through Protestant America. Sunday worship by law in America, it is what restores the wound of the papacy. Revelation 13, verse 10 through verse 17. He's telling you, and he's not some low-level person in government, not some man some municipal lawmaker, or just some, councilman in some town or city. This is a man who's a chief legal expert, the last word on every policy issuing from the Department of Labor, a cabinet department. And he's telling you what the agenda is. Where are the Seventh-day Adventist Christians? Where are they? What is being taught in our local churches? What's happening in marriages, in homes, in the work of preparation? Marie, take it away.
And Pastor, he's not only telling us, we're seeing what he has written down come to fruition, right? It was his policies that indicated that we needed to strip workers of their rights, and it's been done. So if he told you X was going to happen and it came to pass,
yes,
you have to believe that Y is also going to happen. It's just a matter of when. And so may Lord help us. Unbelievable.
Take it away, Marie.
Yes. So now we're just going to confirm who President Trump has confirmed as his labor secretary. And of course, we touched on this on Friday, and so we won't delve deep into this, but he chose Lori Chavez de Raymer. And it says that Trump's pro-union pick for labor secretary. And of course, we're mentioning the fact that she's pro-union. And again, hindsight, this makes complete sense. We just discussed this on Friday about how this is not something that's typical of a Republican administration. Generally speaking, Democrats are the ones that, embrace unions. And on the Republican sides, they're for businesses. And so again, hindsight, when you see all of the pieces together, you can see why this makes sense. And think about it, Pastor, back to what you talked about, how they're ruffling the feathers of the hornet's nest, the labor unions, right? They're ruffling their nests. Now imagine they can say, listen, somebody who is a proponent for labor unions is in office. She has a track record in Congress of advocating for labor. I mean, I hope that we can see this.
Okay, let me say it. So in one administration, one office, one cabinet position, she joins left and right.
Yes, correct.
One cabinet secretary unites the left party, donkey party, with the elephant party. It's clear. Continue.
Mm-hmm. So we're just going to take a listen to a clip here so that you can see it for yourself that she really is, in fact, pro-union.
Marie, before I play that clip, you said something earlier, and that is the Republicans are pro-business. Mm-hmm. May I give a statement on that? On one more perspective?
Sure.
Based on what we're covering today, are they really pro-business or are they really pro-church? Think about that. Because what Jonathan Berry is proposing is now demanding of businesses to rest on Sunday. If they were pro-business and business say, we want to open on Sunday, they would say, whatever the businesses want, allow them to do it. No, we want business. We'll force businesses to rest on Sunday. Do you see it now? So because again, is the church above state? The merchants are made rich by the church.
I was just going to mention that.
Yeah. Revelation 18.
Mercy.
Verse 2, verse 3. Babylon. The merchants are made rich by her. So they aren't pro-business, they're pro-Babylon. Take it away now, Marie.
Help us. Yes, we're going to play that clip of
Central Oregon's previous U.S. Congresswoman Lori Chavez DeRemer, Donald Trump's nomination for Labor Secretary, testified before the Senate Help Committee today. Chavez DeRemer discussed her past support of the PRO Act, pro-union legislation that allows all workers to freely unionize. It's been strongly opposed by several Senate Republicans. Chavez DeRemer said the bill was imperfect and emphasized that Congress has to work together on labor laws. We got reaction from local unions.
If confirmed, my job will be to implement President Trump's policy vision, and my guiding principle will be President Trump's guiding principle, ensuring a level playing field for businesses, unions, and most importantly, the American worker.
I don't think she can.
Marie.
Right. So you can clearly see that she has a track record, with the labor unions. And we're just going to touch and go on the next articles. Again, we covered this on Friday, this past Friday. If you want to go back to that video, you can take a look at that. But in this following article, you can see that even the unions have endorsed her. This article this is from the New Yorker, and this mentions the Teamsters and how, they say that she is the exact type of champion for the American worker that Republicans should get behind if they are serious about becoming the working class party. So it just goes to show, everything is in place. And in the following article, this shows another union also has endorsed her. And I just want to make note of the fact that this is the AFL, the CIO, that is making these remarks, how they should talk about her record of being a pro-union lawmaker, rather. And what's interesting about this as well is the fact that, Pastor, this was the same union. If hopefully your audience remembers, when I showed that montage of clips where you saw the union workers, the very first clip of the woman that was speaking, she represents this union. And so can you imagine this labor secretary going back to that very union that is upset and say, hey, listen, I'm for you, let's work together. Now, mind you, she already has Jonathan Berry in her ear telling her what she should be doing, and they're negotiating with the labor unions. Like I said, it's clear. It's clear. If you want to see it, it's clear. So in this final clip, we're going to show two clips. And in this final clip, we're going to see how Jonathan Berry, once they've established their work on the federal level, we're going to see that the work is going to be handed down to the states so that they can begin legislating Sunday laws. And remember that marriage was the first twin in the two institutions. And we saw the counterfeit, right, of the same-sex union and how it was legislated on the state level and then became a federal law across the land. And so we're seeing how the second twin is following in the same footsteps. So let's take a listen to the first of two clips.
Interesting.
Yes. Yeah. So I don't think I don't think Congress has the authority to mandate like a national closing on the Sabbath. That was always a state decision to do that. But let me add, it was always a state decision to do that.
They did it.
and yeah, I'm not saying this practice was uniform, homogenous, whatever, but very, very widely spread, and only recently in the last few decades have most states moved away from this. So this is, I think this is about as far as the federal government could properly go in this space, but it would be an encouragement and inducement to rest, but really to kind of coordinate commercial activity for the other 6 days of the week.
Mary, 2 points, but I heard him mention a word you referenced earlier.
Inducement.
Inducement.
Yes.
Now, everybody, did you hear this man just say 6 working days? So if he says 6 working days and rest on Sunday, number 7, how is it he's going to mention Sabbath also? He's pushing 6 days work, rest on Sunday. But then he says we are going to, we should tolerate or should accommodate 7th-day Sabbath keepers. That wouldn't be 6 days. It's 5 days labor and 2 days rest. The point I'm driving home is this. Everybody, give me 10 seconds of your time right here. These men are liars. He's being disingenuous. Let me give you Exhibit A as if we're in court. Do you remember when Trump actually stated on the campaign, I know nothing about Project 2025? This man, Trump, disassociated himself from Project 2025. Who just nominated Jonathan Berry to be the solicitor for the Department of Labor? President Trump. Did President Trump not know that Jonathan Berry is connected to Project 2025 and actually wrote the section on labor? Do not trust anything these men say. The only thing you must listen to is what they tell you is coming and their track record. They say X will come to pass, X has come to pass. They say Y will come to pass, Y has come to pass. So when they say Z, Sunday law, Alpha and Omega, Z will come to pass, you better believe it. Here it is, clip 2.
When should states use this?
Now, notice when he says Sunday, how he's going to sprinkle in Sabbath, should. When it's for Sunday, he speaks boldly, assertively, and aggressively. But when he's going to allow for Sabbath, it's a passing point. Watch carefully. Listen and watch.
When should states use this power to check corporate power? This is where prudential judgment has to come in. I don't have bright line rules to give you here, but I want to lay out some guideposts, some categories of state actions that are likelier to be prudent applications of state power to balance corporate power. And another one in the collective action space that I'm fond of, call it the Chick-fil-A rule, would be to revive Sunday closing laws and carve out a space under which commerce does not intrude. Very well settled that this is within a state's authority to do. And I would add, with accommodation, should be included for Saturday Sabbatarians as well.
And may I add, should. But when for Sunday, it's must. But for Sabbath, should. Come on, my friends. Understand, he is an attorney. When attorneys are drafting up letters to support you, defend you in the court, they know exactly the choice words to use. They only say Sabbath accommodation now just for them to implement their laws undetected, with less resistance. And once they hold position completely, they will outlaw and nullify freedom of worship for all seventh-day Sabbath-keeping individuals. Lastly, on this point, he said collective action rules. So one of his collective action rules is to bring in Sunday worship by law. And what have we been covering? Collective bargaining. Collective bargaining. How many more emphasis should I place on this? How many more evidences do you need to see? They're telling you they're making changes to bring in Sunday worship by law? Marie.
Pastor, I mean, what more can I say? It is abundantly clear where we are in Earth's history. All of the prophetic elements seemingly are coming together within this administration. So, as you often say, could it be? It's very possible that we may see a Sunday law within this current administration. May the Lord help us to be ready for them.
Any closing words for us, Marie?
I just wanted to add one more biblical application. This past Sabbath, you did an in-depth study in the evening, to prove where we are in history so that we could understand where we're headed. And I think that's important for us as well, so that we can see where all of these things are tending, so we know exactly where we are. And this past Friday, we discussed how there were 3 separate accounts in the Bible that a labor crisis was brought to view. And of course, we referenced Exodus. We also, with the children of Israel in Egypt, we talked about how the people united in Matthew chapter 27 to crucify Jesus. We also referenced James chapter 5, which brought a labor crisis to view in the last days. And of course, we know that the spirit of prophecy also tells us in Maranatha, page 182, paragraph 2, that that the labor unions are going to assist in bringing a labor crisis. Of course, she says the trade unions will be one of the agencies that will bring upon this earth a time of trouble such as has not been since the world began. But I think what's important for us to do is to identify how the children of Israel ended up in bondage, because that will ultimately lead to this labor crisis, or what led to the labor crisis in Egypt. So in Genesis chapter 47, verse 13 and 15, I'm just going to reference those. The Bible brings to view how there was this worldwide crisis, which led to an economic crisis, right? And verse 15 mentions this. It says that money faileth. Aren't we on the very precipice of an economic crisis? I mean, that's currently what's taking place. During a recent interview, President Trump refused to rule out a possible or potential recession. And I also want to know, as I mentioned earlier, that the world's economies are all interlinked. And you see how he's introduced these tariffs that have gone around the world. And so again, we're seeing how this could potentially push us, if not into a depression, it could most certainly push us into a recession. So when the economy collapsed back in Joseph's day, remember, it was then that the Egyptians sold themselves into slavery. And when that happened, the Egyptians sold their tangible assets to the government. So you can say that there was some sort of wealth transfer. It's also worth noting that Joseph represents a religious entity, right? Because he was the one who united with the state, and he was also the one that was orchestrating this. You can read this in Genesis chapter 41, verse 55. It says, "And when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said unto all the Egyptians, Go unto Joseph, what he saith do." So in my view, in my estimation, doesn't that sound very much like what Project 2025 is doing, uniting with the state, and now is instructing the individuals, right? And of course, that's proxy for the papacy, right? Because it's the papacy behind Project 2025 that's pulling the strings. And of course, to end this, we know the rest of the story. Once the Egyptians sold themselves into slavery, it opened up the door for the children of Israel who came to live in Goshen, right, during the famine, to end up in this labor crisis under the new Pharaoh. And so I personally believe that we are on the very verge, like I said, of an economic crisis. And remember, once this happens, it's going to disrupt everyone's lives, right? And they're already protesting. They're already upset about what he is currently doing. Can you imagine? It would spark, this, like I said, labor crisis. And remember, we're also told that a Sunday law will be introduced, right, to restore temporal prosperity. So in my own estimation, I believe this is where we are. And so, brothers and sisters, if we know that this is where we are, we have to see that this is where it's going. But praise God that the labor crisis didn't end there, right? It ended up with an exodus, with us leaving, right? They went into the wilderness. We have to go into the wilderness as well, right? Into country living. And thereafter, we'll enter into the Canaan land. I'm looking forward to that. I can see the gleams of the golden morning.
Well said. My closing point is going to surround the coming time of trouble. And the coming time of trouble in the last days is likened unto Jacob's time of trouble. That's all throughout Scripture. Daniel 12, verse 1. Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 5 through verse 8. Jacob's time of trouble. All faces are turned into paleness. It's as if men are having children. That's Jeremiah 30. And Paul writes in the New Testament, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. Jacob's time of trouble. Do we know, or do we recall, that before Jacob met Esau, that there's actually a labor crisis? And Jacob didn't have the authority to bargain, to negotiate with Laban. I want to read that verse for you. In Genesis chapter 31, verse 7, just quickly, verse 7. This is chapter 31, don't forget that, of Genesis, verse 7. And your father, Jacob speaking, and your father, that's Laban, and Laban have deceived me and changed my wages 10 times. What's happening here? This is financial oppression. This is a wage, a labor conflict. Look at verse 41. Just when Jacob is about to leave Laban's house, verse 41. Thus have I been 20 years in your house, Laban. I served thee 14 years for thy 2 daughters, 6 years for thy cattle, and thou hast changed my wages 10 times, except the God of my father has sustained me. A labor crisis. Laban, we can say the employer. Jacob, the employee. A labor crisis. That was chapter 31 of Genesis. What happens now in Genesis 32? It's God saying, now head on home, Jacob. And then he heard Esau with a band of men are coming. Time of trouble. And Jacob began now to wrestle all night with God in prayer. Am I converted? I will not let you go until you bless me. What is your name, Jacob? You shall no more be called Jacob, but Israel. A name change, conversion to meet the crisis. So as we see the labor challenges, we know what time it is. And one of these will bring us into that son-in-law crisis. I'm not sure, as I close, I'm not sure, sister. Yes. Thank you. Amen. You know, last point here, Marie, the shocking thing is you have the Elephant Party joining with Labor, and people are wondering, what's the end goal? Well, the Elephant Party is promoting Sunday worship by law. So would it not naturally make sense to unite with Labor? 6 days labor, rest on Sunday. The signs are here. They're ominous. No more calls for now. They're ominous. The signs are here. And as I mentioned, Dr. Ben Carson, a professed SDA, what is he thinking? What is he thinking? He was so bold on the campaign trail with President Trump, promoting Project 2025. There's actually an actual article stating he is an author of a section in Project 2025. What would he say now? When all these evidences are presented before him, you are a part of a movement to change laws to promote Sunday worship by law. Would that not prosecute your own people and persecute your own people? What do you have to say now, being a part of such a movement and promoting it? You're on record saying 10 commandments into public schools, or 10. I wonder what he would say right now. He's eerily silent as of late, but he can run around and speak about health, quote unquote health. But the real issue, the crux of the matter, silence, silence, silence. God told us, as he told Adam and Eve, stay clear of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Great Controversy, page 587. They may promote things which are in harmony with the Bible, but God's people cannot unite with them because they will enact laws, Sunday law, to persecute God's people. Great Controversy, page 587. We cannot unite with them. And he has united with them. What would he say now? And the other leaders linked to this tyrannical movement. Marie, thank you again. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we're thankful today for midday power surge and what we have covered. May we make use of what we're receiving. May we find ourselves like Jacob, wrestling not against you, but wrestling with you. We have so many prayer requests that we desire to be answered by you. And like Jacob, we're saying today, Lord, we will not let you go until you bless us. And I pray your people will take heed to those words. While the world is saying, hands off, hands off, hands off, you said something similar to Jacob. Let me go, for the day breaketh. Hands off, Jacob, the day breaketh. Genesis 32, verse 26. But Jacob said, I will not let you go. Not hands off, hands on. Not hands off. Lord, we say today, hands on. Clinging to you, for you are our hope, sustenance, our Jehovah Jireh, our provider, our Savior. Bless your people, all those who made the sacrifice to join us today, and those who will join us hereafter. Bring us back at the appointed time, and may we remember we have nothing to fear for the future, except we shall forget how you have led us, your teachings in our past history. May we cling to our Ebenezers to give us strength in these last days. While many are saying hands off, we say today, hands on. We thank you for hearing us. We thank you for answering, is our prayer. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen. Marie, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Pastor, for having me.
Beloved, by God's grace, I'll see you on tomorrow at 12 noon Eastern for Midday Power Surge. God bless.